everybody. This is MCE Graduate Assistant Carson back again with another CWU Science story. This time I'm joined by our very own Dr. Darci Snowden from the Physics Department. Dr. Snowden, thanks so much for being willing to share your science story with us and for taking the time to sit down with MCE. We're really excited to feature you, and I'm personally very excited to hear about your work since I know absolutely nothing about physics. And with that, I'm gonna let you share your science story and start by asking how you got involved with your field.
Okay, well, thank you for having me, first of all. Yeah, in my science story, I feel like I've told it a lot of times because I host a camp every summer where I try to inspire kids. So I tell them my science story. But it's a long one because I literally have been interested in science for as long as I can remember. So there's not like a moment where I can be like, oh, this thing happened and I knew I wanted to be a scientist. Like I was the kid that was asking for the science kits, for Christmas. And like I was doing chemistry experiments like alone in my room as a child. So it's always kind of been in me. I think that curiosity and love of investigation and science. I am a space scientist. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that later, but yeah, at some point it was probably movies. Sometimes I think it was Space Camp, the movie, which you guys can watch on YouTube for free, that made me want to be a space scientist. But yeah, at some point I just got it in my head I was going to be a space scientist. So I went to space camp when I was in middle school, which is a pretty common thing for, if you ask space scientists my age, like a lot of us went to space camp, which is kind of funny. And yeah, at some point in middle school, like the ambition clicked on. I decided I was going to be a scientist, and I really focused in on doing the best I could in all my classes, but especially math and science. Like I was going to get an A in everything. So I turned into an ambitious little kid and high schooler in high school. Yeah, I did all the science fairs and things like that. But I also had my first physics class, which I really loved. I really enjoyed it. And I kind of realized that physics was the foundation of all space sciences. So no matter what I wanted to do in space, having a physics major as an undergrad would be a great foundation. So I basically, I did my research. I looked for good physics programs around the country, and I went to the best one I got into. I kind of tricked my parents into letting me go to private school by taking an ROT scholarship. And then I later, ROTC, and then later I declined it. So I feel a little bit about that. But yeah, so I went to a very competitive school that was very challenging, and I majored in physics, and it was really hard. Like I try to emphasize that to my students. Majoring in physics, especially at a difficult school to begin with, was really hard, but I persevered. But as an undergrad, you keep learning things about yourself. So I knew I wanted to major in physics, but I kind of always knew that I wasn't going to become like a typical physicist. Like maybe I wasn't going to pursue physics by itself in graduate school. So, but I learned I didn't really love observational astronomy. I didn't like being up late, and it was cold. Nothing ever worked, at least when I did it. But I did like coding. Like I discovered I liked computer programming. I took a geophysics class that I really loved. I'm kind of an outdoorsy person, so I like the combo of physics and then geology. And so I decided that's what I was going to pursue in graduate school. So I wanted to study planets, and I wanted to do geophysics. So I went to the University of Washington, and I did major in geophysics. Yeah, but I also came to the Northwest, and so I said I was a really ambitious little kid. I started balancing my life a little better in graduate school. I had a lot of fun in Washington as well, being outdoors skiing and hiking and doing a lot of fun things with friends. So continuing my science story, I did get my PhD from the University of Washington. And then I went to University of Arizona at a place called the Lunar Planetary Lab to do a postdoc. And I learned so much there because you're surrounded by planetary scientists. Everyone in the building is a planetary scientist. And I actually got to work more directly with the Cassini mission, which is a mission, a big flagship national mission that was orbiting Saturn at the time. So that was really exciting. And I probably learned as much as a postdoc in those 2.5 years as I did as a graduate student. But I really miss the Northwest. I really miss Washington State. So that's kind of what brings me back here. Like I just wanted to get a job back in Washington State. So now I'm really stoked to be teaching physics. Like I I kind of had, I mean, I was a geophysicist, but I wasn't doing like super, super pure physics after I left my undergraduate school. So it's really fun to dive back into that, or having been diving back into that here. And it's fun to work with students, and it's fun to teach and inspire younger students. So that's my science story. It's quite long, but that's kind of how it goes. You figure out that you love science, and then you let your mind evolve and like what that means as you go through school and train yourself more.
You
Yeah.
just roll with it. You just go with it.
You roll with it. Yep, exactly. But it does take some perseverance because like, yeah, it's not always easy.
Absolutely. Especially with something like physics.
Right.
So given all of that, what do you think makes your research relevant, and what are the broader societal impacts of your work?
Right. So what I do specifically, I'm a space physicist, like if you in the field, but really what I for most people that means I'm a planetary scientist that studies the interaction between planets and their atmospheres and the charged particles and the electromagnetic fields in space. So it's kind of a very physicsy niche of planetary science. Um, and so I mostly do that through analyzing spacecraft data and writing computer models. It's I mean, once you become a scientist, you're answering small questions that are part of a really big picture. So when you ask like, what's the societal impact of what I do? It's not as clear as if I was like an environmental scientist, right? And I'm like I'm finding contaminated water or something like that, right? Or saving people's lives. Space science isn't quite like that, but what I tell people is that don't take for granted what we know about space, right? We know that, right, the Earth is orbiting the sun, and we know things about the universe, and we know how old the universe is roughly. So I'm discovering things so that humanity can understand more about, where we come from and how important we are in space. So I think that's part of what I do. But my little narrow niche, yeah, like most people are probably not going to be strongly affected by the little things I discover about Titan's atmosphere.
That sounds cool though. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. It's not things that you would think about. So when you do,
Yeah.
it's
And I kind of say like space science is like the gateway drug for science in general. Like students, younger people love to learn about space, and they don't always become space scientists, but they might become some other kind of scientist or engineer, but it could have all initially started with their fascination with space. So yeah.
Well, last question. If you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to your younger self,
Yeah.
what would it be?
Well, this is fun. As a professor, you get to always give advice that you wish you would have given yourself. But for me, it probably would have been to be confident and like don't compare yourself to others and go to office hours. Like I did not, I was a little bit too shy as a student to admit sometimes when I didn't understand things. And now that I'm a professor, I'm like, oh gosh, it's so much easier, when you can actually help the students than when you're trying, it's so frustrating to watch them struggle and not get help. So I would have told myself to basically spend more time going to office hours. Yeah.
I concur.
Yeah.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. And that was also all the questions I had. So thanks again for spending some time with us and for sharing your science story. And hopefully we'll all be able to actually see each other soon. So
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Snowden.